So, traditional Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. To understand atheist and agnostic.
All right, secret. I've got a secret. Hey, Preston.
Hey, Katie.
You know what happens when you dive too deep into the occult?
Bad things start happening to you. Mysterious things.
Mysteriously bad things. Like your audio disappearing from your first recording.
And then your second.
And then the second recording. So, yeah, guys, don't be careful. This is our warning. That
this episode is cursed.
This is a cursed episode. That's the title. This is a cursed episode. That's what I'm going to call it. Yeah, that's right. So that's what we're talking about this week on
the Holy Watermelon Podcast.
Third time, 3 is a magical number, so
hopefully third time is the charm.
Hopefully third time's the charm. All right, so we've had some spooky conversations.
Yeah.
So far. And
now we're really leaning into Spooktober.
Spooktober, and the occult is really super vague.
Right? This huge umbrella for a whole bunch of ideas that aren't really exclusive to one specific religion. It's just kind of this nebulous thing. The word occult comes from the Latin occultus, which means hidden, usually referring to knowledge of a particular kind of secrets.
Secret, I've got a secret. Yes, so the occult is anything sort of supernatural, but not religious. We know religion, is also a pretty broad and vacuous term, but anything that's kind of a half-decent definition is anything supernatural that wouldn't be considered divine.
Yeah, it fits into the discussion of religion pretty
absolutely.
nicely. But what is occult is not always like dogmatic kind of religion, but sometimes a little bit. It's like religion, a little bit tricky.
Right. So some of the things that fall under the occult would be alchemy, astrology, magic, spiritualism, any type of like psychic medium, divination. I was thinking about this the other day. This is why the Harry Potter books were so contentious, because like every subject they learn is an occult subject.
Right. They didn't even bother teaching math in Hogwarts, did they?
They had one called arithmancy, which
is not arithmetic.
No, it's the magic of numbers, which I think was super cool, but they don't really talk about it. Just that Hermione takes it as an option because she took every option in the third book.
The fact that the study of numbers, whether it's magical or mathematical, is optional feels a little weird.
You're clearly someone who likes numbers then, because as someone who hates numbers, thank God it's optional.
But we're talking like 11, 12, 13-year-old kids not taking math.
Oh, I didn't know that was the thing. Oh, are you talking about Hogwarts?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I was like, is this real life? I guess it depends if you're a Muggle-born or not. Because then you would have done regular school.
So the Muggle-borns would have done regular school until, what, the end of grade 6 in North American standards?
Grade 5, yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because I guess when you turn 11 is when you start Hogwarts, so you'd be skipping grade 6 as well. So you wouldn't even have done algebra yet in most curriculums here.
If you're magic, why do you need math? If you have religion, why do you need science? Anyway, we're digressing pretty hard here. So, as Preston mentioned, occult traditions can be very similar to other religious traditions in that it's greater than what you can observe with your cardinal senses.
Yeah, they differ a little bit, that they require mastery of some kind. Like your average Calvinist Christian doesn't worry about mastering anything. He's a lot more worried about just making it through life and hoping that he's not already consigned to eternal damnation. But with no thought of mastery of any supernatural thing at all.
Right.
And so that's kind of the thing that makes the occult interesting.
It's skill-based, yeah.
It's very skill-based. It's pretty fascinating that way. And almost everything that isn't strictly theological does end up fitting into this realm of pseudoscience, just because there's actions that promise effects, but they can't really be reliably reproduced in laboratory settings. It's a tricky way to go.
And if that's our definition, then a lot of things actually fall under the occult. And we have another definition that we'll chat about later. That's actually from a pastor about the occult. And yeah, if it's just something fantastical that can't be explained with science, there's a lot.
Oh, yeah.
That maybe normally wouldn't consider being a cult that could be.
You ever hear how there's a story going around that you've probably heard that scientists don't know how bees can fly? This idea has been going around for a long time.
Because they're chubby and adorable and not even a little bit aerodynamic.
Yeah, and their wings are tiny. So I learned the secret behind this ridiculous statement. There was one scientist back in the 1930s who's like, I don't get it.
So he's just dumb. Okay, yeah.
And every other scientist who works in the field of aerodynamics is like, come on, you can figure this out. And the one scientist who said, I don't get it, did later on say, oh, this is how it works.
I get it.
And for some reason, here we are almost 100 years later, and people are still quoting this idea that scientists don't know how bumblebees can fly. Science is tricky, but it's not that tricky.
Not that tricky. So with that being said, there are instances of the occult all throughout history in all human societies. So this
Absolutely.
is not a Western idea or an Eastern idea or a heathen idea or a whatever.
That they're everywhere.
It's everywhere. The occult is everywhere, always.
It's interesting that it's got a lot of negative press in the West, whereas out East, it's not even looked at as weird. It's just like, yep, this is part of life.
This is part of what we do. Yeah, we definitely have made it a lot darker than it is, and as we explain about it more, hopefully you see that as well, that it's not just like our last two episodes, disappointingly not ooky spooky, but
it does show up an awful lot in our horror stories because it's so poorly understood by so many people that it does make a nice element to add to a scary story to make it a little bit cooler or sometimes scarier.
That's the conversation we had about voodoo, though, right?
Yeah.
Is many major religions have a mystic branch, which could be considered a cult. So there's Kabbalah in Judaism and Sufism in Islam, and there's others in other religions as well. It's not just those two.
Yeah. I think one of the bigger ones of Christianity, historically speaking, would be the Rosicrucian tradition.
Right.
And historically, an awful lot of Freemasons are Christian, and there's just a tiniest little bit of occultism in Freemasonry as well, depending on your branch of Freemasonry, I guess.
Yeah, and how deep you go, just like anything.
Right. Everything is a matter of depth. It's a spectrum.
It's a spectrum. Take a drink. Alfio Levi was a French esotericist that popularized the term occultism. So this is from Wikipedia. It says, unlike older forms of esotericism, occultism does not reject scientific progress or modernity. Levi had stressed the need to solve the conflict between science and religion, something that he believed could be achieved by turning to what he thought was the ancient wisdom found in magic. So if you think of something like alchemy, there is it doesn't work, but there's a scientific process to it to do something magical. So I can see how he's bridging that gap.
For sure. So with things like this, we get into the realm of sound therapy, Reiki, some parts of even the generally accepted alternative medicines can get a little bit funky in this area.
And again, this is another one of those definitions where if it's, can't quite be explained, but there's something happening and there's a process to it, but it can't be repeated in a lab, which is the problem with some of these, then yeah, I would call that a cult. I'm less angry about this now, the third time around, but I mean, it's still a good point to bring up is that, in if you've been on the social media at all in the last, let's say 6 months, you get these people who are so against vaccines because there's no scientific process, but then they're willing to try crystal healing or essential oils, and then they're fundamental Christians on top of it. And it's like, okay, well, one's science, one's the occult, and one is religion. So it's weird to me that you pick the occult over... That's right. I said crystal healing is a cult.
Yeah. I mean, technically it is. It's a little bit funky and doesn't hold up in laboratory settings at all.
And here's the other definition quote that I alluded to this is from Steve Bond, the lead pastor of Summit Christian Church. He says the occult is any practices that leverage supernatural powers or knowledge apart from Jesus Christ. Again, this is where I don't quite understand how you know if it's Jesus or the devil, but it comes back to the not quite science, not quite magic, definitely not religion.
Right. It's so weird that this is how he's drawing a line when the average Christian believes that everything good comes from God and everything that's not good doesn't come from God. And then we get into the question of, is a thing good? And that's
You're on
entirely
a slippery
subjective.
and terrifying slope into an existential crisis.
Right. Now, you have some practices that tend towards fraud a lot more than others, but an awful lot of religions end up slipping down that slope too. So
Absolutely.
what is the line? It's a little too tricky for even one expert to say, hey, this is the deal.
Well, and then, I mean, I think there's a note later on talking about the gift of discernment. That's quite a popular thing to talk about, especially in fundamental Christianity. Well, A, how do you know that's a gift from God or not? And B, like, I mean, you tell me, but isn't Jesus supposed to be the only one rocking around with supernatural powers?
And anybody who is blessed by him. We got all the prophets and the apostles in the Bible also doing miracles pretty often.
Okay, so that's fair. But like a 21st century 23-year-old can be blessed by Jesus too?
In theory.
Okay. It's just how do we know it was Jesus or not?
That's the real trick.
On the same website, this made me lol. It said occultists include Freemasons, witches, psychics, mediums, Satanists, necromancers, and voodoo practitioners, which I just found very closed-minded, to say the least.
It sounds like a list of villains.
Yes, right?
This is produced with an agenda for sure.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, I guess you could put some voodoo practices under the occult, but they would just call them voodoo practices, right? It's not like this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Only if you are a Levian Satanist would you fall under the occult. If you're basically an atheist Satanist, no. And I mean, most Freemasons and I think most traditions are pretty normal.
Yeah, I think so.
I'm sure there's a few odd ones. There's a few odd ones in everything, but
for sure. And like we said earlier, matter of depth definitely comes into play here.
I mean, you can go too far in anything. You can go too far in Dungeons and Dragons. So
that was a thing.
How come this didn't come up previously?
We haven't done an episode on Dungeons and Dragons.
But Dungeons and Dragons and the occult.
I'm sure somebody's done it. We can get into it further later on.
Okay.
But there was a whole season of Riverdale. Archie and friends get way too much into what is not legally speaking Dungeons and Dragons. And people die.
Wow.
Yeah.
Love it.
Which honestly is just playing up the satanic panic from decades past where the stories went around that people would get way too into Dungeons and Dragons and commit crimes.
If you've ever met anyone who's played Dungeons and Dragons, you know that's highly unlikely.
Yup.
Anyway, so we're going to talk about some specific branches of the occult, starting with astrology.
Astrology is a really fascinating thing, and it's unfortunate that astrology really solidified its claim on the name before astronomy became a separate thing.
Because we've all misspoken.
Yeah, for sure. Because astrology does mean the study of the stars, but it's different than astronomy because we're studying the stars to make ideas about what's happening here on the Earth with people's lives and world-changing events.
Personalities and who you
Yeah.
can marry. Who's a good fit. I'm supposed to marry an Aries. I did not. He's a Virgo.
I don't even know what my wife's star sign is because I don't remember what all of the star signs line up to in the
She
calendar.
would be a Cancer.
I believe you.
I only know this because my birthday's after hers,
Uh-huh.
and that's the star sign before mine.
That makes sense.
Oh.
I'm a Gemini because I
Oh.
remember when I was like 10, that was important to everybody.
Everyone
to know your
knew what
star
they were
sign.
when you were 10. Yeah, that's when horoscopes got real big.
Yeah, it's weird that it's become a popular thing, and I haven't looked at the stats recently to see if it's actually currently on the rise, but there was a time when astrology was dying out pretty obviously, and then it just kind of made its comeback. It's super weird. Looking back historically, emperors, kings, and definitely some American presidents have all found it terribly valuable to get into astrology and to consult astrologists. It helped them make important decisions about running governments, whether or not now is the right time to go to war kind of business.
That doesn't sound helpful.
It doesn't, does it? It started to lose popularity when scientists started proving during the Enlightenment era that there wasn't any evidence that the Earth was the center of the universe, and so that helped a little bit. It really lost steam when the scientific method and systematic trial and error and evaluation showed that it was completely unreliable in predicting anything at all, ever.
What? You mean not all Leos will marry Aries?
Right?
Oh, no.
Yeah, it's just crazy talk. Most people are familiar with the use of astrology to excuse faults in one's personality. Oh, she's not a bitch. She's just a Scorpio.
You know what's not in our notes that I just thought of is Mercury retrograde. That's a huge excuse for people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm tired. Mercury's in retrograde. There's actually a website called ismercuryinretrograde.com, and literally you'll just type in and I'll be like, yes or no.
That's fantastic.
It is pretty great. I think we are in retrograde right now. How you feeling?
A little tired. It has more to do with my sleep patterns lately.
Than Mercury. You sure?
Maybe it's just because there's a ship stuck in the Suez Canal again.
Oh, maybe the ship is stuck because of Mercury.
Maybe. Because there's another website, basically the exact same idea, just is the ship stuck?
Did you know about...
No. So talking about, how the star signs don't really line up with anyone's personality, really in real life. The signs in the skies are also read to find messages from the gods and to predict important events. And so astrologists would help out national leaders with big decision making relative to these ideas, which sounded really helpful thousands of years ago, probably, until people realized, oh no, that doesn't actually work.
The whole world doesn't orbit around me?
Right. There have always been criticisms against astrology because of the obvious things that are wrong with it. People usually bring up the issue of free will, the fact that everyone is able to make choices, or at least we feel like we can, and the fact that we can discuss whether or not we have free will helps the argument that we do have free will rather than everything being determined by the stars,
I chose not to marry an Aries.
right?
I
Did that specific option actually come up?
You mean the conversation of you're not an Aries? Should we be together?
Sure, let's go that. That's not what I meant.
I
but
don't
did
know what
that
you
question
mean. No,
come
it
up?
did not come up.
Okay.
And I didn't vet him that way either.
Yeah. Do you ever date an Aries at all?
No, not that I know of.
Okay. Nice. Somebody's really worried about astronomy or astrology.
Yeah.
Wow. Here we are. And I made the mistake anyway. Another argument that has come up against astrology is the fact that people with widely varied birthdays can die in the same battle, meaning the star sign at the time of your birth does not have really a very measurable difference on your actual fate.
No. No, it don't.
But it looks like its present popularity really relies, and I've said this a few times about a few things, on the counterculture from the 60s and 70s. It's now in almost every newspaper. If they're making any real money, it's usually in there. They're paying somebody to make stuff up, or maybe they're ripping it off of older publications.
You mean there
I don't
aren't
even
actual
know.
astrologists hired by the New York Times to write horoscopes?
Yeah, I think so.
Actual astrologists.
Yeah.
Okay. Not just some bored intern.
I mean, how much education does it take to be an astrologist?
I'm going to look this up when we're off. I'm really curious now.
I think if you're professionally paid to write horoscopes, you're as much of an astrologist as anyone else could be.
Oh, shady, Preston. I didn't realize that's where you were going.
That's my feelings on that.
Wow.
So I'm curious whether or not flat earthers buy into astrology. An awful lot of flat earthers talk about this solid dome that's above the earth, and the stars are just kind of painted more or less on this dome. And it doesn't help that this idea is taken from a translation choice from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew Bible. And I just haven't been able to have a conversation long enough with a flat earther on the subject to get into this particular question.
Do you think they would? What's your hypothesis?
I don't feel like I can make a proper hypothesis. I would guess maybe.
Okay. Oh, wow.
I mean, if you're going to
would.
buy into flat earth, there's a decent chance you'll buy into astrology.
I'm really glad that you're not on the fence about this even a little bit. You just have a really strong
I'm
opinion.
close to the fence, but it's true. I'm not on the fence.
I think they would. Like, yeah, I'd say more likely yes than no.
That is my current operating hypothesis until I have a chance to test it and
Talk to
disprove
a
it.
flat earther. So
Unfortunately, it's not an opportunity I'm really hunting for.
I mean,
But if it shows itself, I'll engage.
if you guys know anyone that's a flat earther, send them our email.
Yeah.
Now for my favorite occult practice. If one could have a favorite occult practice, alchemy. Turning metals into gold
Right?
using science. But science tells us it's impossible.
No. Science doesn't tell us it's impossible.
It's very difficult.
Very difficult, hugely energy consuming, and extremely dangerous.
Yeah. Probably why I like it. I love those three things.
Yeah, alchemy is pretty nifty. The idea of turning one metal into another metal, it was really popular as like this great magnum opus of finding the Philosopher's Stone and turning lead into gold or mercury into silver or whatever you have into something better. And then as tests failed and failed, people said, it's impossible. And then the Manhattan Project says, hey, we actually can turn these things into other elements. And
But
boom. Bad bombing.
bad, yeah. results. So alchemy is based on the four classical elements of earth, air, wind, and fire. And so everything, and they're not actually wrong, it's just rudimentary, is that everything is made up of a careful balance of these elements. Yeah, so stones were said to be made of fire, and yeah, the Manhattan Project proved that, yeah.
There's fire in those rocks.
There's fire. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that the properties ascribed to these fundamental elements of earth, water, wind, or air rather, and water. I put so much thought into it, I don't even know if I said all four.
I know. I'm
Water, fire, air, and earth.
Yes.
Those are the four elements.
That's the four elements. Very good. Yeah.
If I say it quick, I'm good. So the idea that these elements have these properties that we're now actually really exploring, like the question of particles and waves, are they even the same thing but behaving in a particular manner at a particular time? It's all really tricky and really fascinating, and these questions aren't new questions. They're just being asked in new ways as we learn more. I think it's really interesting that alchemy is as weird and magical and mystical and philosophical as it is. There's a lot of good science attached to it, even though it's not always part of the practice.
I'm sure they made a lot of scientific progress trying to turn metal into gold.
Oh, absolutely.
Not what they wanted to do, but I'm sure they learned a lot.
I think you're right. It's pretty fascinating to me.
Right. Like I said, it's my favorites. I don't know why. Anyway. So as Preston mentioned, the Philosopher's Stone is the basis of this, and it is considered the perfect transmutation of the elements and is said to bring immortality. The elixir of life is supposed to be
The Philosopher's Stone dissolved.
That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. Is dissolved into it. That the stone, physical hard stone, does not exist anymore. Right.
And like the real question is, did it ever? But there's an awful lot of philosophers and old school scholars who are very convinced that it was a real thing, and that's why the old biblical patriarchs lived to be more than 900 years old in some cases, because they had this thing that kept them alive for so long, and now it's lost to us, and that's why nobody lives to be more than 120 years old anymore.
You know who found the Philosopher's Stone?
Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
Yep.
Just as a fun aside, before Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone was published, and like shortly before, Indiana Jones and the Philosopher's Stone was published.
Yeah, I always thought that was fascinating. I discovered that years ago and then forgot about it. And thinking of it again is just brings me a little bit of happiness that there was a book published to an American audience that said Indiana Jones and the Philosopher's Stone. And then very shortly later, the American publishers are like, Americans don't know what the Philosopher's Stone is, so let's call it Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Maybe it was because of the poor Indiana Jones sales.
Maybe.
And nothing to do with the quality of that novel series.
Maybe.
Alchemy is not strictly limited to Western traditions. Hindu and Buddhism also include alchemy. The Buddhists are said to possess the Philosopher's Stone, and in Tibetan Buddhism, it's actually a brilliant pearl. I imagine like a big, like baseball pearl, like a honking pearl.
I think that's fair. It's got to be special, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, how many times have you misplaced something that's regular pearl sized?
Frequently. All of my pearls are gone.
Yeah, so I would want something this important to be a little closer to baseball size.
Right.
At least if you loosen the couch cushions, you'll notice it.
And in Hinduism, some figures are described as possessing or using a stone that has the same properties as the Philosopher's Stone.
Yeah, it's pretty much everywhere, and I think that's really cool. Alchemy is also really often associated with theurgy, divine works, of how God operates in the universe. So it's basically theurgy is the method of creating the universe. And so alchemy is attached to this, and its study is also the study of the nature of birth, death, and resurrection. So I thought that was actually kind of interesting. The philosophy of alchemy is some pretty nifty stuff and can get very theological. And going back to my love of words, it's no accident that alchemy sounds a fair bit like chemistry. The al, if you want to break up the word, just shows evidence that we've looked at it through a Muslim Arabic lens for a long time. And shemi,
Al meaning the.
yes. And shemi is basically just the French word for chemistry.
The chemistry.
Yeah. But fancy and foreign and mystical.
Oh, alchemy. I love it. Yeah, so they basically have the same meaning.
Yeah.
Which is funny because
Like
in real life
astronomy
they're
and astrology.
Yeah, but they're very different.
Yes. So very different.
Too funny. No, I like your word asides, Preston.
Me too. I think words are great. Next on our list, we have magic. We've talked a fair bit about this over the last month, so don't want to spend a whole lot more time on it. But basically, magic is the use of rituals to affect something in a way that seems unlikely to an outsider, often relying on the assistance of spirits or gods or anything supernatural.
This can also include incantations. I want to say like potion making, but that's not the right thing where they'll make
Elixirs?
Yeah, I guess so. But they'll like mortar and pestle up powders and things like that. Just see our Wicca episode. But yeah, all of those practices would fall under magic. Spiritualism, also kind of a fun one. This would be your tarot and your crystal balls and your seances and your psychic mediums. What else would fall under spiritualism? Ouija boards.
Man, Ouija boards are some really potent part of our popular culture.
Absolutely. Yeah. So all that communicating with the dead essentially, or spirits, falls under here. So, and this is super common around the world. This is not a Western, Eastern thing. Everyone wants to talk to their dead relatives.
Yeah, it's everywhere. Every religion deals with it in some manner or another. And there's some traditions that are like, hey, you need to be really careful about this. And others are like, you can be fine as long as you're talking to the people you want to talk to.
Well, and I was going to say, and then if you look at like Chinese folk tradition, that's the basis of there is talking to dead relatives.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, Taoism, Shinto, and Voodoo traditions
all based off on
spiritualism.
And all on your ancestors. So, one of my big questions, and I alluded to it earlier in the episode, is how do I separate talking to an evil spirit or having this as an evil or malicious gift as opposed to being a gift from God? Because this is a huge topic, right? If you Google the occult, I would say the majority, easily 60% of the websites are about how bad it is from Christian websites telling you to stay away from it. It's actually really hard to research the occult.
Remember being told as a kid, don't touch the Ouija board. You'll invite dark spirits into the house. And I'm like, or maybe I won't.
What if we get a friendly one? What if we get Casper?
Right? That's got to be an option.
Right? So they can't all be evil. We can't all become bad once we die.
Right? Spiritualism is so vague and big, and within every tradition, there's going to be some acknowledgement that there is good spirits and bad spirits that you can interact with, because in real life, walking down the street, there's good people and bad people you can interact with.
Absolutely. It's really interesting to me that, and these were, I don't remember the exact numbers, but statistics out of America is that the majority of Americans are religious. And the majority of Americans also believe in ghosts and spirits, which, I mean,
Even
considering they
an awful lot
tell
of
you,
religious people.
that's true. That's absolutely true. Kind of weird to me considering they tell you to, like, don't go near it. But then there's people like Sylvia Brown
Who goes way into it.
and makes a ton of money off of it. So
Even when she's
so there's
proven to be a liar.
definitely overlap between religious America and people who are paying Sylvia Brown to talk to their relatives.
Absolutely true. Absolutely. And it's weird because if you read into the Hebrew Bible, it specifically forbids dealing with people who have familiar spirits that they deal with. And really, that's the only strong basis we have for why Christians and Jews would be uncomfortable with fortune tellers and witches and whatnot, is this idea that my book says don't do that. But if you don't believe in the book, what reason do you have to believe that idea?
Right?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little weird. And of course, when it comes to spiritualism, there are so many scam artists and have been for hundreds of years. Recently, we have stories like Tiffany Butch, we talked about a little while ago. And famously, we've got Ed and Lorraine Warren, the couple that's the center of the Conjuring series.
Oh, okay.
Which is, interestingly enough, the second highest grossing horror franchise in all of human history. Second only to Godzilla, which makes a little bit of sense there. He's been around for a while.
He has been. Preston, I just had a great idea.
Yeah?
What if we go and get our palms read and do a bonus episode on it?
Oh, I like that. Let's
yeah?
do it.
Okay. Whatever. We'll just go to some weird psychic lady's basement.
Sure.
And we won't tell
know
them
where
that we're not
options
married
come.
to each other.
Ooh, I like it.
Okay.
I know where this can happen.
Okay. I mean, like literally just drive downtown and find a basement and you'll find a psychic. But
This is true.
okay. Okay. I'm really excited now. Unless if you guys think that's a good idea, drop a line on our Discord. But I'm really excited. So even if you think it's lame, I'm probably gonna do it.
Next on our list, we have Hermeticism, which is kind of a big thing. An awful lot of the time when people talk about the occult, this is what they mean.
What they're
an
getting.
awful lot of the time. And this is a tradition that seems to have popped up in Egypt in the first century of the Common Era under influence of Jewish and Christian mystic doctrines and also Greek philosophy. There's a really interesting amalgamation of these things. And the great thing about syncretization is that when smart people pick the best parts from a bunch of popular things, the result is pretty compelling and it lasts a long time. We still have Hermeticism today, 2,000 years later.
And it's probably we'll do a full episode on Hermeticism because it definitely warrants it. And there's things that are from the Hermetic tradition that you don't even know.
Right.
You don't even know. I didn't even know. One of so another Christian site bashing the occult. So Hermeticism is centered around Hermes Trismegistus. He's sort of the central figure. He is a syncretic combination of Hermes and Thoth, two very similar gods from Greek and Egyptian tradition. Thank you. So he is a made-up person. They smashed two people together.
Yep.
And so here's the quote. I think this one is for Prayercast as well. Followers may name Hermes Trismegistus, whose life is shrouded in mystery. He didn't have a life. Remember, he's not even real. As the one who unites all occult teachings and practices. Some believed he was a god, others a demigod. Still others viewed him as a philosopher and strove to live by his teachings. Again, not real. Just makes me a little bit angry. Also really funny that they're just warping. Like, it doesn't take a lot of Googling to figure out that Hermes Trismegistus is a made-up person.
No, if you Google him, the first entry and the little sidebar when you use Google on a desktop device, it will straight up say, this is an amalgam character.
So it bothers me that they're, like, making shit up to push their beliefs on the occult. Anyway. My note says, I just can't handle people making up stuff to foster a weird agenda. Which is true. I can't handle that.
Right. It's frustrating. Trismegistus is a really interesting name to me. Hermes seems like it's just the Roman equivalent of Mercury, who is part of this amalgam. But Trismegistus is a name with a real meaning for sure. It means thrice great, and if you compare this to the grammatical precedent we have of the Holy of Holies or the Sanctum Sanctorum or King of Kings, which mean like the most holy place or the highest king. Here we got a tripling instead of a doubling. So this dude has got to be the absolute greatest.
He's got to be the shit.
Exactly. And that's a really bold name for a made-up character that's the head of your traditional ideas. But I like it. It's a little special.
I like it. I think it's great. So Hermeticism is considered by a religion by some, just like Jediism is. It's better fits into the para-religion category because it can actually be quite compatible with all other religions. And so many people are only interested in the philosophy or the magic, ignoring the theological piece of Hermeticism.
Yeah, it's easy to adopt a thing if you want to just dump some parts that don't fit with your existing worldview.
Absolutely. And a good example is actually the term good vibes, which I literally saw in a coffee mug the other day. I was like, eh. Hermeticism deals with good and bad vibrations. Mm-hmm. That is a hermetic idea. So you can see how, like you said, I saw it on a coffee mug the other day. This is something that is just the philosophy of it has become part of our culture without having to attach to the theology of it.
Right. And we've actually got a good handful of little ideas that seem to have originated with Hermetic traditions that have crept into common use. The phrase "as above, so below" has become pretty popular. And the original statement is, that which is above is like to that which is below, and that which is below is like to that which is above. And that means that we are able to understand heaven based on what we are able to perceive here, and predict heaven based on what we see here. And that's a pretty interesting way to go through life.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of an awful lot of people who say that heaven is completely unimaginable, you couldn't possibly understand it in your current state, which just sounds like a really rough way of saying stop thinking about it or you'll realize it's nonsense.
Yeah, and that's where that's where little rebellious Katie is like, well, if it's so great I can't understand, why do I care? Like, why do I?
Sure.
Okay. If I can't understand, then I'm not going to give two shits about it.
If I can't understand it, is it even
is
actually
it worth
that
my
good?
Yeah, is it worth my time to care? Okay. Doesn't sound like it. Right.
It's an interesting way to look into the future and the world around you, I guess. I've talked about this before, how some pantheistic Christian theology is derived from just adopting ideas from other Eastern traditions over the course of the counterculture movement. There are some Christian traditions that have adopted the pantheistic idea directly from Hermetic traditions. And so those ones, if you're worried about how long or where the source of this idea is, you can look at how long they've been talking about it. And if they've been doing it for more than 100 years, more than likely Hermetic tradition. And those handful of Christian traditions that actually talk about reincarnation definitely are taking this from the Hermetic texts more than from other Eastern traditions.
Preston.
Yeah?
I did something bad.
What'd you do?
I went down an internet rabbit hole.
Oh, no. Where'd you go?
So when you Google occultism, Nazi occultism comes up a lot.
Oh, no.
So I learned all about Nazi occultism. And it was a wild ride. I
bet.
Did you know Hitler had hooves?
I have never heard that before.
Hooves. If I can make clippy clop noises with my mouth, I would. Hooves. That's why I always wear shoes.
To hide his feet.
Hooves. So, on top of that, Nazi occultism is based in I hate this word.
Ariosophy.
Ariosophy, thank you. Nazi occultism is based in Ariosophy, which is an esoteric ideology, which you'll remember from our Wicca episode. Esotericism is hard to define, but it's basically secrets understood by a small group of people. So Ariosophy is the wisdom of the Aryans, implying that somehow Aryans are better or smarter than other people.
I always think that's funny because Hitler seems to have a wild idea of who the Aryans were.
Yeah, he's got them confused with like the Vikings for sure.
Right. But I was like, we know the Aryans are the people who brought the Vedic religion to India. And since that's the only place in the whole world where we see that religious tradition, historically speaking, it's a lot more likely they were a lot closer to India than, say, the opposite end of Europe.
Right? They were all a little darker than he thinks they were, that's for sure.
Yeah. I think most scholars agree that they were probably Persian, Indo-Arab, somewhere around there. But it's like the far northwestern Europe is a big
To get that blonde and blue-eyed, yeah, no. There are also claims that Hitler was a demon, not in addition to his hooves. So the person that he actually dedicated Mein Kampf to has like gone on record saying that when Hitler spoke about the final solution, his voice changed, his character changed. It was like talking to an entirely different person. My guess is that he's just a psychopath, but claims that
I
he
don't
was
know. If I talk about something I'm really passionate about, you might notice a change in my tone.
You start talking like Satan. I'm really passionate about the occult. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Sorry. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, there were a lot of really weird fringe beliefs throughout the Nazi movement, including that Aryans are descended from aliens. They were really fascinated with the Holy Grail, as seen in Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. I was going to say Indiana Jones and the Holy Grail. That's not real. Lucifer, astrology, Atlantis, just like really into some weird ass theories. And I was reading it, being like, how? And then I remember that QAnon's a thing. So yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Makes it a little bit more understandable.
It's like if you're that far gone already, then Atlantis is actually not that much further to go.
Right.
So
It's a short leap from that point. It's interesting to me that the Nazis were such great bad guys for Indiana Jones because of their occult interests. It wasn't just because they're the bad guys in the time where we have Indiana Jones. It's because of what they were into.
And I mean, it just helps make the Indiana Jones stories more fantastical.
A little bit.
Chicken or egg?
Generally speaking, or in this
Sense.
scenario?
Were you more likely to become a Nazi because you already were cuckoo bananas, or did Nazis become cuckoo bananas? You know what I mean? Like, did you already believe in Atlantis and you're like, and then some guy comes and says, let's kill all the Jews. You're like, yeah, okay, I can get on board with that. Or were you like, I agree with killing all the Jews. And then they were like, what do you think of Atlantis? And they're like, yeah, okay.
I think both. I think some people joined up because they were already troubled, and some people became more troubled because of their association with the party. I don't have a solitary answer for you.
I mean, you're
sorry.
probably right that it is probably both. And some people never would have gone as far as Atlantis.
Right. There's nobody who bought into everything 100%. Or, sorry, you can't say that the whole group bought into everything 100%.
I mean, and we know that there were Nazis that didn't even agree with what the Nazis were doing.
Right.
It was their own.
Yeah, you had people who were actually party members who did not think it was okay.
What am I trying to say? Self-preservation.
Yeah,
It's the word
for sure.
It's the word I was looking for. It's a spectrum.
Yeah. That's twice in one episode.
Wow.
It's been a while since we doubled up.
Yeah.
It's a wide, varied world, and it's really quite fascinating. But occult traditions don't tend to be specifically religious on their own. Instead, they're usually treated as a science, or more accurately, a pseudoscience, used in conjunction with an altogether independent dogma. Usually. The thing that bothers most monotheists, as far as I've been able to observe, is that these pursuits are perceived to distract from the worship of the one true God, and sometimes also suggest that there is an alternative path to immortal glory or salvation. There's actually a reasonably entertaining movie that came out a couple decades ago called The Last Sin Eater, and the idea that there's somebody other than Jesus who can take away your sins is not terribly foreign to this idea.
Scandalous.
Right. And it stresses a lot of people out, makes people uncomfortable about how much they know about their faith and what they need to know about their faith to really feel like they're faithful.
Mm-hmm.
And it just makes people uncomfortable.
Yeah. There's also the risk of letting the devils in.
Right.
Which we'll talk about in 2 weeks.
We're going to have some good fun with that one as we creep ever closer to Halloween.
Whoa. Anyway, my final thoughts are that the occult is not actually something to be feared. Nah. And it's so vague that when people say don't dabble in the occult, ask them to be more specific.
For sure.
Just to see the look on their faces, because most of them don't know what they're talking about. And I can say that as someone who didn't know what she was talking about until we researched this.
Right.
So.
It's such a wide, wonderful world, and there is a little bit of mystery and magic to it, depending on how you define those words.
Wow.
And there's no reason to go around stressing and being afraid of all of these things that you're not familiar with. And hopefully we can help out with that and help you become more aware of what's really going on.
Demystifying the mystical. Katie and Preston. Together, we fight crime.
And ignorance.
And mostly ignorance. Definitely not crime. I'm not built for that.
Vigilantism is discouraged. But fighting ignorance, I think, is a good pursuit. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us as we've been doing this for, as of this episode, a whole year.
Whole year. Aww. It's our 1 year anniversary.
It's fantastic.
We're holding hands, just so everyone knows.
The visual medium
right.
Not working out here.
Yeah, so we thank you all so much for a great year, and we want to keep going. And the best way to do that is to support us any way you can, which can look different. You can follow us on social media, like, comment, share. You can join our Discord channel where we've been having some really great conversations recently. Or
we've got Patreon. We would love to make a little bit of money doing this so we can do it full time and maybe even do this weekly instead of bi-weekly.
I was thinking that today too.
It'd be great, right?
Yeah.
And if a subscription model doesn't work for you guys, there's always Spreadshirt,
where we have all our great merch.
And we're slowly building up our collection of things so that you can have more and more options as we develop. We're pretty excited about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, thanks for joining us. Peace be with you.
By the late Middle Ages, the Christian prophecy had fulfilled itself.